I arrived at my wedding venue and found it locked, dark, empty. My in-laws had canceled it 2 days earlier without saying a single word to me. 150 guests were already on their way. What I did in the next 60 minutes ended up on the local news. My name is Kendra, I'm 33 years old, and I'm a forensic data auditor. I arrived at my wedding venue and found it locked, dark, and completely empty. My in-laws had canceled it 2 days earlier without telling me a single thing. 150 guests were already on their way. What I did in the next 60 minutes made the local news. Before I continue with this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe if you've ever had to deal with a toxic family that thought you were an easy target. The gravel crunched beneath my heels as I stepped out of my car, holding up the skirt of my custom-made silk wedding dress. The cool Hudson Valley air usually felt refreshing, but today it felt sharp and cutting. It was 1 p.m. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 3. I stood in front of the grand wrought iron gates of the estate, staring at a heavy metal chain and a brass padlock securing them shut. There were no valets preparing the entrance. No florists arranging the massive white rose arches we had paid for. There was nothing except deafening silence. I reached into my purse to call the venue coordinator, assuming there had to be some strange misunderstanding with the entrance. Before I could dial the number, a silver sedan sped up the driveway and screeched to a stop near the service entrance. A woman holding a clipboard stepped out, her eyes wide with panic. It was the estate manager. When she saw me standing there in my wedding dress, all the color instantly drained from her face. "Kendra," she said, her voice trembling violently. "What are you doing here?" I looked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm getting married in 2 hours. That's why I'm here." The manager swallowed hard, clutching her clipboard against her chest as if trying to shield herself. "Kendra, your wedding was canceled Thursday morning. Beverly called us personally. She said there was a major family emergency and that the entire event had to be canceled immediately. She came to our office that afternoon and collected the $80,000 deposit check." My brain stopped functioning like that of an anxious bride and instantly shifted into the cold, calculating mindset of a forensic data auditor. $80,000. 50,000 of that was my own personal money, hard-earned money I had transferred into our joint wedding account just 1 week earlier. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone and dialed Hassan, my fiancé. He was 35 years old, supposedly a successful consultant, and the man I was supposed to pledge my life and loyalty to today. Hassan answered on the 4th ring. Through the speaker, I could hear loud background noise, people laughing, upbeat music, and glasses clinking. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I'm outside the venue. It's locked. The manager just told me your mother canceled our wedding and took the deposit." Hassan sighed loudly into the phone. It was the sound of a man mildly inconvenienced instead of a groom whose wedding day had just been completely destroyed. "Kendra, why are you all the way out there?" "Mom said she talked to you on Thursday. We agreed to just do a simple backyard barbecue at her house today to save money. We're firing up the grill right now. Just turn around and come back." I tightened my grip on the phone. My knuckles turned white. "Do you seriously think I agreed to cancel our wedding, throw away 2 years of meticulous planning, and have a barbecue in your mother's backyard on the day I'm supposed to wear my wedding dress?" Hassan sounded annoyed now, completely dismissing my reality. "You don't have to be so dramatic about it. You know Kearney has been struggling with her startup. She needed funding immediately or her business was going under. Mom said you were happy to sacrifice the wedding deposit to help your sister-in-law out of a tough spot. It stays in the family, Kendra. Don't be selfish today. Just put on normal clothes and come over here." Before I could even formulate a response to his unbelievable audacity, there was a sound of scuffling on the line. Someone snatched the phone away from him. Beverly's voice came through the speaker, dripping with condescension and fake aristocratic authority. "Listen to me very carefully," she sneered, dropping any pretense of being a loving mother-in-law. "This family does not waste money on frivolous parties just so you can play princess for a day. That money went toward a real investment. Kourtney's company needed a cash injection to stay afloat. You should be on your knees grateful that you're even being allowed into this family. You're a 33-year-old orphan with no connections, no pedigree, and no real background. Marrying my son is the best thing that will ever happen to you. Now put on a normal dress and come to the backyard. Or don't come at all." I stood beside my car, the Hudson Valley wind whipping my veil around my shoulders. I didn't shed a single tear. Beverly thought the word orphan was an insult. She believed my lack of a wealthy, established family made me weak and desperate for her approval. What she didn't understand was that being completely alone in the world meant I had to become ruthless to survive. I built my entire career tracking down financial criminals. I traced missing millions for massive international corporations. I knew every trick, every hidden banking loophole, and every sign of financial deception. Beverly had just admitted on a recorded line that she took $80,000. Because of my profession, all my calls are automatically recorded for security and compliance purposes. She had just handed me a verbal confession. I hung up the phone without saying another word. I walked to the hood of my car and placed my laptop on the metal surface. I connected my computer to my mobile hotspot. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. I logged directly into the joint wedding account I shared with Hassan. The balance displayed on the screen was 0. I didn't stop there. I pulled up the detailed transaction history. The money hadn't just been withdrawn in cash, it had been transferred to an external account. To authorize a wire transfer of that size from an account requiring 2 signatures, someone had to submit an electronic power of attorney to the bank. I bypassed the standard user interface and extracted the document image from the bank's secure portal. There it was. A signed power of attorney form granting Beverly full, unrestricted financial control over our joint account. It was signed by Hassan. He had willingly given his mother the legal right to drain my life savings without my knowledge or consent. The entire dynamic of the situation instantly shifted in my mind. This was no longer some petty argument about a wedding venue. This was no longer about a toxic mother-in-law favoring her golden child daughter, Kourtney. This was grand theft. This was a textbook case of wire fraud. They genuinely thought I would sit in my car and cry. They assumed I would drive to their house, accept a cheap hot dog on a paper plate, and swallow my humiliation just to be part of their family. They thought that because I loved Hassan, I would blindly let them steal $50,000 of my hard-earned money to fund Kourtney's failing lifestyle. I snapped my laptop shut. My heartbeat settled into a cold, steady rhythm. 150 guests were currently driving down the highway. Many of them were Harrison's wealthy business associates, investors, and corporate partners. They were expecting a grand event. They were expecting a high society celebration. I was about to give them a show they would never forget. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was exactly 1:14 p.m. The ceremony had originally been scheduled for 3, with the cocktail reception beginning at 2:30. That gave me exactly 1 hour and 16 minutes to completely rewrite the script my in-laws had prepared for me. If I sent out a mass cancellation email, Beverly would win. She would control the narrative. She would play the victim, telling all her high society friends that the unstable orphan bride had a nervous breakdown and canceled everything. The guests would turn around, go home, and the theft of my $50,000 would be swept under the rug as an unfortunate family disagreement. Beverly was counting on my shame. She bet everything on the assumption that a woman alone in a wedding dress in front of locked gates would be too humiliated to fight back. She drastically underestimated my tolerance for conflict. I grabbed my phone and called the concierge desk at the Grand R Hotel. The Grand R was a five-star resort located exactly 10 miles down the valley. It was also the official hotel block for our wedding. I knew for a fact that Harrison's biggest investors, the venture capitalists funding his real estate development company, were all staying there in executive suites. These were major players, men and women who controlled millions in corporate assets and expected absolute perfection. A polite voice answered the phone. "Thank you for calling the Grandi Hotel. How may I direct your call?" "Put me through to the events director immediately," I said, keeping my tone firm and authoritative. "This is an urgent corporate-level matter." 30 seconds later, a man named Richard answered the line. He sounded rushed, probably managing a dozen different weekend events. I didn't give him the opportunity to brush me off. "Richard, my name is Kendra. I'm the bride who booked 40 of your executive suites for my wedding guests this weekend. We've just experienced a catastrophic failure with our primary venue due to a sudden structural hazard. I have 150 high-profile guests arriving at your lobby within the next hour. I need to reserve your largest available ballroom right now." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry about your venue, but booking a ballroom with 1 hour's notice is completely impossible. We have to consider staffing, catering, security, liability." I interrupted him smoothly but firmly. "Richard, I'm an executive auditor. I understand logistics, and I understand pricing. I also know your Diamond Pavilion wasn't booked this weekend because I tried to reserve it for my rehearsal dinner 2 months ago and was told it was empty. I need the room, an open bar, and whatever catering staff you can pull from the main restaurant to serve heavy hors d'oeuvres. I am prepared to authorize a $50,000 charge to my Platinum corporate card this very second to make it happen. I will also sign a full liability waiver releasing your hotel from any service expectations normally associated with a planned event. I just need the space and the bar." Silence hung over the line. $50,000 for an empty room and some champagne was an incredibly profitable margin for a hotel events department. Money speaks the universal language of urgency. "I can have the Diamond Pavilion unlocked in 10 minutes, Richard replied, his tone instantly shifting from hesitant to extremely accommodating. "The bar will be fully staffed by 2. We can have premium charcuterie and seafood trays coming out of the main kitchen by 2:30. I'll need the card details and a digital signature on the contract immediately." I read him my corporate card numbers. The card had been issued by my firm for high-level international investigations, and it had a personal limit capable of easily absorbing the cost. I would gladly pay the bill myself just to secure the stage for the performance of a lifetime. The contract arrived in my inbox 3 minutes later. I signed it with a swipe of my finger and returned it immediately. The venue was secured. Now I needed to redirect the audience. I opened the wedding planning app on my phone. We had used a digital RSVP system to track meal preferences and hotel accommodations. With 2 quick taps, I exported the entire guest contact list into a new broadcast message. I carefully selected the names Hassan, Beverly, Harrison, and Courtney and removed them from the recipient list. They would not receive this update. They would remain blissfully unaware in Beverly's backyard, grilling hot dogs and waiting for me to show up crying. I typed a short, professional message. "Urgent update. Due to an unforeseen emergency at the original estate, the wedding reception has been relocated to the Grandi Hotel in the Diamond Pavilion. Please proceed directly to the hotel. Drinks and food service will begin at 2. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your understanding." I hit send. 146 texts and emails shot across the cellular network, redirecting the entire day. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, gathered the massive layers of my silk wedding dress, and slid behind the wheel of my car. I kicked off my uncomfortable designer heels and drove barefoot, pressing hard on the accelerator. The engine roared as I spun the steering wheel, leaving the locked estate gates behind in a cloud of gravel dust. I was driving straight toward the Grandi Hotel, but I knew I couldn't execute the next phase of this operation alone. I needed someone sharp, someone who understood the legal implications of what I was about to do, and someone who wouldn't flinch at the sight of high society destruction. I pressed the hands-free button on my dashboard and called the only person I trusted. Monica answered on the second ring. She was my best friend, but more importantly, she was a ruthless commercial litigator who devoured breach of contract disputes for breakfast. She had been my confidant through every major audit I had ever conducted. "Hey," Monica answered, sounding slightly stressed. "I'm in the car. I got your weird mass message about the venue change. What's going on? Did the estate roof collapse?" "The roof didn't collapse," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the winding road. Beverly canceled the wedding, took the $80,000 deposit, and Hassan signed a power of attorney allowing her to drain my personal savings to do it. They told me to come to a backyard barbecue instead. Dead silence filled the car speakers. When Monica finally spoke, her voice dropped an octave, shifting from friendly bridesmaid to courtroom predator. "They stole $50,000 of your money and canceled a wedding with 150 people already on the way?" "Yes," I said. "And I just spent another $50,000 renting the Diamond Pavilion at the hotel. Every guest is heading there right now, including Harrison's biggest investors. I'm driving there as we speak. I need you to meet me at the main entrance. We have work to do." "I'm flooring it," Monica replied, fierce loyalty radiating through the speakers. "What's the play, Kendra?" "We're not having a wedding," I told her, glancing at myself in the rearview mirror. I looked perfectly calm, an auditor ready to deliver a final report. "I'm about to access Harrison's corporate financial records. We're going to find out exactly why Beverly was desperate enough to commit wire fraud. Today is about to get very interesting." I pulled my car into the wide circular driveway of the Grandi Hotel. The towering stone facade rose ahead of me, but I drove past the valet stand, steering my vehicle into a secluded corner of the VIP parking lot. The tires squealed slightly as I shifted into park. I glanced at the dashboard clock. I had roughly 50 minutes before guests began flooding the lobby. My chest felt tight, not from heartbreak, but from the massive adrenaline rush of an active investigation. Monica's black SUV pulled into the spot right beside mine. Seconds later, she stepped out adjusting her tailored blazer, her heels striking the concrete aggressively. She yanked open my passenger door and slid inside, slamming it shut behind her. She took one look at my enormous silk wedding dress spilling across the center console and immediately pulled out a legal pad. Her lawyer instincts were fully activated, radiating fierce, protective energy that grounded me back into reality. $50,000, Monica said, her voice sharp and clinical, transferred across state lines or between digital institutions under false pretenses using a heavily manipulated power of attorney. That is the textbook definition of federal wire fraud. Depending on how Hassan framed the authorization to the bank, we're talking conspiracy and grand theft. He handed his mother a loaded weapon, and she fired it directly into your bank account. Federal sentencing guidelines for this kind of domestic fraud are severe, Kendra. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind moving faster than the cooling engine. "I know the statutes, Monica. The bank will flag the transaction the second I file a fraud dispute. I can recover the money. The account insurance covers unauthorized access, especially when a power of attorney is invoked under coercive or deceptive circumstances. But recovering the cash isn't my priority right now." Monica raised an eyebrow, her pen hovering above the notepad. "It's not your priority?" "Kendra, they stole your life savings to throw it into Courtney's failing business. You need to freeze their accounts before Beverly wires that money offshore or burns it paying business debt. If that money disappears into a corporate black hole, untangling it could take months of litigation. Think about it like an auditor, I said, turning fully toward my best friend. Harrison runs a commercial real estate empire. He constantly brags about closing $20 million commercial properties at Sunday dinners. Beverly wears diamonds worth more than my first car. Why would a woman with supposedly unlimited credit lines need to steal $80,000 in wedding deposits to fund a small tech startup? Why not just write Courtney a check? Monica's eyes widened as the implications settled in. Because they don't have the cash. Exactly, I replied. Rich people do not commit desperate, sloppy, traceable fraud against their own future daughter-in-law unless their legitimate borrowing channels are completely exhausted. Beverly didn't steal my money because she's just a terrible mother-in-law. She stole it because she's drowning. And if she's drowning, Harrison is drowning. Their entire family portfolio must be a house of cards. Financial criminals only start stealing from their immediate inner circle when external lenders have already shut them out completely. I leaned back into the leather seat, ignoring how the intricate beading of my wedding dress dug into my back. I don't just want my money returned, I continued, my voice steady and cold. I want to know what financial abyss they're trying to fill. Hassan lied to me. He looked me in the eyes for 2 years and presented himself as the heir to a thriving real estate dynasty. He called me selfish for wanting a proper wedding while his mother looted my savings. I'm not going to just cancel a credit card and cry in the shower. I'm going to tear down the walls of their entire operation. I reached into the back seat and dragged my heavy leather briefcase over the console, setting it directly onto my lap atop the layers of bridal silk. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out my primary work laptop. It was a heavily encrypted machine issued by my auditing firm, equipped with enterprise-grade processing power and secure tunneling networks designed to penetrate corporate firewalls. Monica watched me open the screen. Kendra, whatever you're about to do, you need to remember the strict legal boundaries of your profession. You cannot just hack into a corporate server without a warrant or subpoena. If you cross a line, you risk your own license. I don't need to hack anything, I said, a grim smile forming at the corners of my mouth. 6 months ago, Harrison asked me to do the family business a favor. He said his accounting department was migrating to a new cloud server and wanted a professional to ensure the data architecture was structurally sound. I set up the encrypted gateways for him to save consulting fees. As the architect of that migration, I retained a highly secure read-only administrative login to verify system integrity during the transition period. They never revoked my credentials. The screen cast a pale blue glow through the dark parking garage interior, illuminating the dashboard. It is perfectly legal for me to access my own administrative dashboard. I'm just running a diagnostic review, a very deep and very thorough diagnostic review of their general ledger, accounts payable, and investor distributions. If they used my wedding money to patch a corporate deficit, the fingerprints will be all over their recent ledger entries. Monica leaned back in the passenger seat, crossing her arms. A fierce predatory grin replaced her worried expression. Well, as your legal advisor, I strongly recommend you perform your routine system maintenance with extreme prejudice. Show me the money, Kendra. Find out exactly who they're paying. I placed my fingers on the keyboard. The adrenaline surged through my veins, pushing away any lingering pain from Hassan's betrayal. At that moment, I was no longer a stranded bride. I was a financial Grim Reaper about to dissect my future father-in-law's entire financial existence line by line. The loading screen for Harrison's corporate server reflected against my windshield, casting a sterile white glow over the intricate lace of my wedding gown. I entered my administrative credentials, bypassed the two-factor authentication, and pressed enter. The system didn't hesitate. It recognized me as the architect who had built this digital fortress 6 months earlier. The main dashboard materialized across my screen, displaying the real-time financial health of Harrison State Holdings. I didn't have to dig deep to find the rot. It was sitting right on the surface, reeking of desperation. Look at the liquidity ratios, I instructed, tilting the screen so Monica could see. A healthy commercial real estate company this size should maintain at least $5 million in operating cash across its main accounts to cover vendor payments, payroll, and short-term liabilities. Look at their aggregate balance. Monica leaned in, her eyes scanning the digital ledger. The combined balance across 7 corporate accounts was less than $12,000. "They're completely broke," Monica whispered. Genuine shock replaced her usual courtroom composure. "Kendra, this is a company that just broke ground on a $30 million luxury condominium project in Manhattan. How is their operating cash practically zero?" "Because the condominium project is a ghost," I replied, my fingers flying across the keys as I opened the account's payable ledger. I ran a custom query, filtering for incoming transactions matching the exact amount Beverly had stolen from the wedding venue deposit, $80,000. The search results populated instantly. There it was, a wire transfer initiated Thursday morning, moving $80,000 from Beverly's personal checking account directly into the corporate operating fund. I traced Beverly's funding source backward. The digital paper trail showed a direct transfer from my joint wedding account into Beverly's account only 1 hour earlier, authorized through the forged power of attorney Hassan had provided. "Beverly lied to Hassan," Monica said, pointing at the screen. "She told him she needed the money to save Courtney's startup, but she didn't send Courtney a single cent. She injected it directly into Harrison's collapsing company." I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the data. "No, Monica. Hassan wasn't lied to. Hassan is the vice president of acquisitions for this firm. He has full access to these ledgers. He knew exactly where the money was going. He just fed me the Courtney story because he knew I would never authorize draining our wedding fund to rescue his father's incompetent business practices. He used his sister as a human shield to justify stealing from me." I clicked through the outgoing transactions from that same Thursday. I needed to know exactly why Harrison was desperate enough to let his wife rob his future daughter-in-law. If a company is bleeding out, $80,000 is just a bandage. They needed that exact amount to stop an immediate catastrophic threat. Then I found the outgoing transfer. Exactly $79,500 had been sent from the corporate account Thursday afternoon. The recipient was the Internal Revenue Service. "A federal tax lien," I announced, pulling up the attached payment receipt. Harrison failed to pay his quarterly corporate taxes. The IRS issued a final notice of intent to levy. If he hadn't paid this specific penalty by Friday morning, the federal government would have automatically frozen every one of his business accounts. Monica let out a sharp breath. If investors found out the IRS was freezing assets, it would trigger mass panic. They'd demand an immediate audit of their portfolios. Harrison was hours away from total exposure. You and your wedding deposit were just collateral damage to keep the federal government off his back for a few more weeks. The puzzle pieces snapped together with disgusting clarity. The extravagant dinners. The constant bragging about new acquisitions. The pressure for Hassan and me to have a massive high society wedding with all of Harrison's business partners on the guest list. It had all been a calculated performance, a desperate illusion of extreme wealth designed to keep current investors calm while attracting new capital. I opened the investor distribution ledger, my heart turning into solid ice as the true scale of the criminal operation revealed itself. "Monica," I said, my voice barely above a whisper as I highlighted a column of red numbers, "this isn't just a failing business. This is a Ponzi scheme." I pointed at the transaction histories. Harrison hasn't generated a single dollar of legitimate revenue from property sales in more than 14 months. The Manhattan condominium project is nothing but an empty lot. Yet the ledger shows he's consistently paying massive monthly dividends to his oldest and most powerful investors. If there's no revenue, where is the dividend money coming from? Monica asked, leaning closer to the screen. From new investors, I explained, feeling a wave of disgust wash over me. Look at the flow of funds. A new client wires millions of dollars for a commercial development project. Harrison immediately splits that capital and redirects it to pay fake returns to earlier investors. He's commingling restricted investment funds to create the illusion of profit. This is textbook wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. I quickly pulled up the master guest list for my wedding, cross-referencing the names with Harrison's active investor database. My stomach twisted. 45 of the VIP guests currently driving to the Grandi Hotel are active investors in this scheme, I announced, staring at the names. Harrison insisted on inviting them. He told me it was crucial for networking. He was using our wedding as a prop. He wanted these wealthy men and women to sit in a luxurious ballroom, drink premium champagne, and watch his son marry a successful auditor as proof that his empire was secure. He planned to pitch his next fake project during cocktail hour. Monica unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle. Kendra, we can't just host a party for these people. We need to call the authorities. If you hold this reception knowing these investors are actively being defrauded, Harrison will try to drag you into the fallout. He'll claim you were part of the facade. I closed the laptop and locked it safely inside my briefcase. I'm not hosting them a party, Monica. I'm hosting them an intervention. I had just spent $50,000 on a private stage, a microphone, and a captive audience filled with victims of federal fraud. Harrison and Beverly thought they could steal my money, cancel my wedding, and leave me crying outside locked gates while protecting their flawless reputation. I grabbed my car keys and looked directly at Monica. My determination was absolute. They wanted a grand family event. I'm going to give them one. Call your contacts in the Financial Crimes Division. Tell them to have agents waiting outside the Grand, our hotel, in 45 minutes. I have a presentation to deliver. Monica didn't hesitate for even a second. She pulled her phone from her blazer pocket and dialed a direct line reserved for high-level corporate emergencies. I ignored her rapid-fire legal jargon and focused entirely on the screen in front of me. I had 45 minutes to build the most devastating slideshow presentation of my professional career. I opened a new presentation file. First slide, bank fraud. I inserted a high-resolution screenshot of the forged power of Attorney Hassan had submitted against our joint account. I placed it side by side with a legitimate signature from our mortgage application, highlighting the glaring inconsistencies in the handwriting and upload timestamp. He hadn't even tried to make it look authentic. He had rushed the forgery through an automated digital portal, assuming my money would be long gone before I ever thought to verify it. Second slide, tax evasion. I exported the IRS final notice of intent to levy. The document was a giant red flag signaling Harrison's total financial collapse. I added the wire transfer receipt showing my stolen $50,000 being redirected straight to the federal government to temporarily stop the asset freeze. I formatted the slide with thick red borders. The evidence was undeniable. My wedding deposit had been legally categorized as a distressed corporate tax payment. Third slide, the Ponzi scheme. This required a clear visual flowchart. I pulled the raw data from the accounts payable ledger and dumped it into a new spreadsheet. I highlighted a $2 million deposit from a new investor named Jonathan Pierce. Then I mapped the immediate disbursement of those exact funds into 50 separate dividend checks mailed to earlier investors. I color-coded the money flow in bright crimson. It was a perfect closed loop of criminal deception. New money came in, old investors got paid, and not a single real asset was ever developed. As I compiled the evidence, a cold and revolting realization settled over me. For the past 2 years, I had believed Hassan was simply heavily controlled by his domineering parents. I had made excuses for him, assuming he was merely a passive beneficiary of Harrison's wealth. I opened the investor communications folder on the server. Every fake progress report sent to investors about the non-existent Manhattan condominium project carried Hassan's digital signature. He was the vice president of acquisitions. He was the one drafting the fraudulent construction updates. He knew there was no construction crew. He knew there were no building permits. He was actively selling phantom properties to the same people he had invited to our wedding. Monica covered the receiver of her phone with her hand. "Agent Miller is on the line," she said, her voice tight with anticipation. "He's with the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. He needs hard evidence before he can send federal agents to a private event at a luxury hotel." "Give me an encrypted email address," I demanded, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I compressed the master ledger files, the IRS levy notice, the forged power of attorney, and the fraudulent investor updates into a highly secure folder. "Tell him he's receiving a data package right now. If he cross-checks the routing numbers in the investor distributions against Harrison's corporate tax filings, he'll see the money laundering in under 3 minutes." Monica relayed the information. We sat in the dim concrete shadows of the VIP parking structure, listening to the heavy silence on the other end of the line. 2 minutes later, Agent Miller's voice crackled loudly enough for me to hear through the receiver. "The data is verified," he declared, his tone shifting into absolute authority. "We have units 10 minutes away. Do not let Harrison or Hassan leave that building." I saved the presentation onto a secure encrypted flash drive and firmly removed it from the USB port. "The authorities are on the way," Monica said, ending the call and slipping her phone back into her pocket. "We need to get to the Diamond Pavilion and set up the audio-visual equipment before the guests start arriving in the lobby." I gathered the heavy layers of my silk wedding dress and stepped out of the car. The concrete floor of the parking structure felt freezing against my bare feet, but I barely registered the sensation. I slipped my designer heels back on, straightening my posture until I stood tall and rigid. I gripped the flash drive tightly in my palm like a loaded weapon. My heart was no longer racing. It beat with the slow, measured rhythm of an executioner walking toward the gallows. We had taken exactly 5 steps toward the glass doors leading to the VIP elevators when the violent screech of tires echoed through the concrete structure. A massive black luxury SUV swung around the corner, ignoring the speed limit entirely before slamming to a stop directly in our path. The doors flew open before the vehicle had fully parked. Beverly emerged first, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. She wore a custom-made mother-of-the-groom dress that probably cost more than my first year of university tuition. Behind her came Harrison, his face flushed with dangerous anger. Courtney practically leaped out of the back seat, aggressively typing on her phone with a vicious scowl while clearly recording the entire encounter for her own twisted amusement. Finally, Hassan stepped out from the driver's side looking frantic, pale, and completely disheveled. They had found out. One of the 150 guests must have called them to ask about the sudden venue change to the Grandi Hotel. Their pathetic backyard barbecue cover story had been destroyed by my mass text message. They had raced here in blind panic to stop me from destroying the carefully constructed illusion of generational wealth they had built. Well, Beverly sneered, slamming her car door shut and marching directly toward me. "You really think you're clever, don't you?" I stood perfectly still, my fingers tightening around the hidden flash drive in my palm. The final confrontation had officially begun. Beverly closed the remaining distance between us. The harsh fluorescent lights of the parking garage caught the heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. Her expensive perfume floated thickly through the stale air, failing to mask the sharp metallic scent of desperation underneath it. Harrison flanked her on the right, puffing out his chest and adjusting the jacket of his tailored suit like a silverback gorilla preparing to defend territory. Courtney hovered close behind him with a nasty smile stretched across her heavily contoured face while holding up her smartphone, still recording everything. Hassan stayed several steps behind them. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darting frantically between me, his mother, and the heavy concrete pillars of the garage. "Who gave you the authority to text my guests?" Beverly hissed, her voice vibrating with barely restrained fury. "You have caused an absolute public relations disaster. My phone has not stopped ringing for 20 minutes with confused investors asking why they're being redirected to a hotel ballroom instead of my private estate." I didn't flinch. I didn't step backward. I looked down at her from the advantage of my designer heels, letting the silence stretch deliberately for several seconds. "I sent that message because I'm the bride," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly level and completely devoid of emotion. "And since you saw fit to cancel my venue and steal $50,000 of my personal money, I decided to host my own reception. I'm sure your investors will appreciate the upgraded catering." Beverly's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might crack. She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Without breaking eye contact, she shoved it forcefully against the intricate lace bodice of my wedding dress. I didn't lift my hands to catch it. I let the heavy package slide down the silk fabric and hit the filthy concrete floor with a dull thud. Monica, standing firmly beside me, let out a mocking laugh. She bent smoothly, picked up the envelope, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stapled together at the corner. "What is this?" Monica asked, flipping through the pages with the practiced efficiency of a commercial litigator. Her eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, her expression shifting from mild amusement to absolute disgust. "You cannot seriously be pushing this garbage." Beverly ignored Monica completely, keeping her poisonous stare locked on me. "It's a financial control agreement," she announced, lifting her chin with grotesque superiority. "Some people might call it a post-nuptial modification, although since you've ruined today's schedule, we'll execute it before the vows are exchanged." I stared at her, genuinely amazed by the sheer audacity of the woman standing in front of me. "You stole my wedding deposit this morning, and now you're bringing me paperwork in a parking garage? You are going to compensate for your insolence today," Beverly declared, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "You humiliated this family by sending that mass text. You undermined my authority. You cost us the quiet, intimate backyard ceremony we generously offered you after Courtney required emergency capital." She pointed sharply at the papers in Monica's hands. "Sign that document. Transfer full legal administrative control of your current income, your retirement portfolios, and your personal savings directly to Hassan." I studied her face closely, analyzing the micro-expressions flickering across her rigid features. There was no genuine anger over a ruined backyard barbecue. There was only raw, unfiltered panic. They had drained my $50,000 to pay the Internal Revenue Service, but that was only a temporary bandage over a fatal wound. Their corporate accounts were completely empty. The Ponzi scheme was collapsing. Beverly was trying to secure a permanent, legally binding pipeline into my six-figure auditing salary because they needed my income to finance their daily illusion of wealth. "Sign it. Hand full control of your income over to my son, and we'll forgive this embarrassing tantrum," Beverly demanded, stepping closer. "Sign it, and we'll all get back in the cars. We'll drive to my house and finish this wedding in the backyard right now." A girl from your non-existent background should be on her knees thanking God that a family of our status is still willing to take you in after a stunt like this. Monica let out another sharp laugh, while reading directly from the second page of the document. Clause 4, subsection B, she read aloud, making sure her voice carried across the empty parking spaces. The undersigned agrees to deposit all future wage earnings into a wealth management trust supervised exclusively by Harrison State Holdings. She lowered the paper and stared at Beverly. You didn't bring a prenuptial agreement to a parking garage. You brought a debt servitude contract. If she signs this, she legally can't buy a cup of coffee without Hassan's written authorization. Hassan finally stepped forward, emerging from behind his mother's shadow. He looked pathetic, a grown man in a custom tuxedo acting like a messenger boy for a sinking financial ship. Kendra, just do it, he pleaded, using a soft, manipulative tone that made my stomach twist. Mom is giving you a second chance. You really messed up today by going behind our backs and contacting the guests. We can still fix this. I'm a professional wealth manager. Letting me handle your income is the smartest thing for our future. I looked at the man I had loved for 2 years. I looked at the man who had forged a power of attorney, authorized the theft of my life savings, and drafted fake construction updates to steal millions of dollars from innocent people. He truly believed he could manipulate me into signing away my financial autonomy. He thought I was just an emotional, hysterical bride who would do anything to keep a ring on her finger. You want to manage my wealth, Hassan? I asked, my voice dropping into a dangerous icy whisper. You want me to funnel my salary into Harrison State Holdings so you can manage my future? Yes, Hassan said quickly, nodding with desperate hope flashing in his eyes. It's just a formality, Kendra. It keeps family assets centralized. It protects us. I took one slow, deliberate step toward him. My heels echoed sharply against the concrete like the ticking of a clock. The $50,000 that you and your mother stole from me this morning was supposed to pay for our wedding, I said carefully, making every word crystal clear. And now you want the rest of my net worth? Tell me, Hassan, how exactly does financially destroying your future wife protect our family? Courtney let out a loud, dramatic sigh, lowering her phone for a fraction of a second. God, you're so selfish, Kendra. You make a fortune auditing data all day. You have more money than you even know what to do with. Why are you hoarding it when our family needs liquid assets? You should be proud to contribute to the empire. I slowly turned my head toward my future sister-in-law. Empire, I repeated, tasting the word. That's what we're calling it now? Beverly snapped her fingers impatiently, pointing toward the contract still resting in Monica's hands. I'm finished arguing with a petulant child. You have 2 options, Kendra. You pick up a pen, sign that agreement right here on the hood of this car, and apologize to my son. Or we leave you here in the dust. And I will personally make sure every influential guest upstairs knows exactly why this wedding was canceled. I will ruin you in this city. I looked at the documents. I looked at Beverly's demanding outstretched hand. Then I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of an auditor who had already closed the trap. I am not signing a single page of that document, I said, my voice ringing sharply through the concrete pillars of the VIP parking garage. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. I delivered the statement with the absolute certainty of a judge handing down a final sentence. Hassan threw his hands into the air, adopting an exaggerated posture of an exhausted, misunderstood victim. Why are you acting like this, Kendra? He complained, stepping forward with fake betrayal painted all over his face. You're ruining our wedding day with your paranoia. You're taking a perfectly normal family financial agreement and turning it into something malicious. Mom is only trying to help us build a strong foundation. You're letting your emotions completely blind your sense of logic. The collective gaslighting began right on schedule. This was their signature tactic. Every time someone questioned the integrity of Harrison State Holdings, the entire family instantly closed ranks and aggressively attacked the sanity of whoever dared to ask questions. Courtney stepped out from behind her mother, her designer purse swinging aggressively from her shoulder. "You always do this, Kendra," she sneered, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You take something incredibly generous and twist it because you simply don't understand how real families operate. You're so damaged from growing up with absolutely nothing that you see every gesture of inclusion as a threat. We're trying to protect you from your own financial ignorance." Beverly nodded solemnly in agreement, placing a comforting hand on Hassan's shoulder as though he were the one being cornered in a dark parking garage. "She's deeply unstable. Hassan, I warned you months ago. I told you she wasn't built for our world. People from her kind of background simply do not possess the psychological capacity to handle generational wealth. She's projecting her own deep insecurities onto our generosity." I stood perfectly still, letting their toxic words wash over me. I analyzed their strategy the same way I would dissect a fraudulent tax filing. It was a fascinating display of psychological warfare. They were deliberately weaponizing my status as an orphan to isolate me. They wanted me to feel alone, defective, and desperate for their validation. They believed that if they undermined my self-worth long enough, I would eventually surrender, sign the post-nuptial agreement, and hand over my entire auditing salary just to purchase temporary approval. Monica stepped slightly in front of me, acting like a legal shield. She crossed her arms, her courtroom stare locked firmly onto Beverly. "The only thing damaged here is your grasp on reality," Monica declared, her voice slicing through the heavy air. "Are you seriously attempting to coerce my client into surrendering her legal rights under duress just hours before a major public event? Any judge in the state of New York would throw this garbage straight into the trash and sanction the attorney who drafted it." That was when Harrison finally lost control. The illusion of the sophisticated, benevolent patriarch evaporated instantly. He stepped forward, his heavy dress shoes slamming against the pavement, puffing out his chest in a classic display of physical intimidation. He loomed over me, using his size to force submission. He violently adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, a suit undoubtedly purchased with money stolen from unsuspecting investors. Then he lowered his face close to mine, his voice dropping into a guttural threatening growl completely stripped of his usual country club charm. "Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little girl," Harrison threatened, jabbing a thick finger through the air inches from my face. "You're nothing but a low-level employee. You're a glorified accountant sitting in a cubicle at a corporate accounting firm. Do you understand who I am? Do you understand the kind of power I wield in this city?" I held my ground, forcing myself not to blink as I stared directly into his bloodshot eyes. "I know exactly who you are, Harrison," I answered coldly. He ignored me completely, consumed by his own manufactured sense of superiority. "I golf with the senior partners who sit on your firm's executive board," he boasted, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "I dine with the men who sign your paychecks. If you don't pick up that pen, sign those papers right now, and get in the car to go to the backyard, I will make one phone call. Just one simple phone call." He leaned closer, trying to inject maximum terror into every word. "I will have you blacklisted by tomorrow. I will personally destroy your auditing career across the entire United States. I will make sure your managing partner fires you for insubordination and unethical conduct. You will never work in corporate finance again. You'll be completely destitute, begging for scraps on the street exactly where you belong." The audacity of his threat was staggering. It was the absolute peak of fake upper-class privilege. Harrison genuinely believed his status as an older, wealthy white man gave him the divine right to crush a professional woman simply because she refused to be robbed. He was weaponizing the illusion of massive systemic power to force my compliance, threatening to destroy my livelihood to protect his fragile ego. I looked at this man who was currently delinquent on federal taxes, whose corporate bank account contained less than a few $1,000s, and whose entire real estate empire was an elaborate criminal fantasy. He was a cornered rat pretending to be a lion. I did not shrink away from him. I squared my shoulders and matched his stare. "Call them, Harrison," I challenged, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. Harrison blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by my complete lack of fear. "What did you just say?" I said, "Call them," I repeated, stepping even closer until he was forced to lean backward slightly. "Go ahead. Pull out your phone right now and call my managing partner. Tell him you want to destroy my career. But while you have him on the line, maybe ask him how federal investigators usually handle executives who use commercial real estate portfolios to launder money through a Ponzi scheme." Harrison's face went completely slack. The aggressive dominant posture vanished in a fraction of a second. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Hassan stumbled backward, his eyes widening in pure terror. Courtney lowered her smartphone, her jaw hanging open. Beverly let out a sharp, strangled gasp, clutching at the diamond necklace around her throat. In that exact moment, they realized I was not some naive, emotional bride. I was an apex predator in the financial world, and I had already seen their ledgers. The heavy silence in the concrete parking structure lasted exactly 10 seconds. I watched realization spread across their faces, stripping away their carefully constructed layers of country club arrogance. They were trapped. I had just dismantled their greatest weapon of intimidation, leaving Harrison completely powerless. Instead of showing even an ounce of remorse or basic human shame, Hassan reacted with the frantic anger of a coward whose mask had just been ripped away. He stepped forward, his face twisted into a strange combination of outrage and panic. He did not apologize for his father's threats. He did not deny the existence of the Ponzi scheme. He simply turned once again to blaming me, retreating into the only defense mechanism he had ever known. "You're so selfish, Kendra," Hassan shouted, his voice cracking as it echoed through the concrete walls. "You're completely losing sight of the bigger picture. You make all this money. You have this high-paying career. Why don't you understand how to sacrifice for family?" Beverly's head snapped toward the sound. The panic lurking beneath her polished exterior finally exploded into raw terror. The guests were arriving. Harrison's investors, corporate partners, and wealthy socialite friends, the same people they had lied to for years, were stepping out of the elevators and walking directly toward the hotel lobby. The private confrontation in the parking garage was over. We were about to step onto a very public stage. A group of around 15 people emerged from the elevators, their voices echoing through the concrete structure. These were not distant relatives or casual acquaintances. I recognized them immediately from the audit files I had just reviewed. These were Harrison's elite investors. Men in custom-tailored suits and women wrapped in designer silk walked confidently toward the glass lobby doors. They were the whales of Harrison's portfolio, the people financing his fake condominium projects and fraudulent commercial developments. They expected a flawless luxury wedding event. They had absolutely no idea that their investment portfolios had already been drained to zero. One of the men spotted Harrison standing in the middle of the garage and immediately smiled, lifting a hand in greeting. "Harrison," he called cheerfully. "There you are." We were confused by the venue change text. Structural issue at the estate. Harrison's entire body stiffened. For one brief second, I watched the old instincts kick in. The polished salesman mask tried to slide back into place. His shoulders straightened. He forced a laugh that sounded dry and strangled. "Minor inconvenience," Harrison replied too quickly. "Nothing serious. We've made alternative arrangements upstairs." The investor nodded casually, apparently satisfied for the moment. But then his eyes shifted toward me. Toward the bride standing barefoot in stained silk at the edge of the parking garage. Toward Monica holding a thick stack of legal papers. toward Beverly's pale face and Courtney's trembling hands. The man's smile faded slightly. "Kendra," he said cautiously, "is everything all right?" Every member of Harrison's family froze. I could practically hear their collective heartbeat. This was the moment they feared most. Not federal prison. Not bankruptcy. Exposure. Their entire empire depended on controlling perception. As long as wealthy people believed Harrison was successful, new investors would continue pouring money into the machine. The illusion itself was the product. And now the illusion was standing on the edge of collapse in a parking garage. Beverly stepped forward suddenly, forcing a brittle smile onto her face. "Everything is perfectly fine," she interrupted sharply. "Just a little family disagreement before the ceremony. Kendra has been under quite a bit of emotional stress today." There it was again. The attempt to paint me as unstable, emotional, irrational. A hysterical bride instead of a forensic auditor holding evidence of federal crimes. I slowly looked at the investor, then at the others gathering behind him. More elevator doors were opening. More guests were arriving every second. Dozens of wealthy investors now stood only a few yards away from the family that had been stealing from them for years. Hassan's voice dropped into a desperate whisper. "Kendra," he hissed, stepping closer, "don't do this here." I turned toward him calmly. "Do what?" "Please," he said, panic cracking through his polished tone. "You've made your point already. We can fix this privately." "Privately?" I repeated. "You forged legal documents, stole my savings, and helped operate a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. And now you want privacy?" A ripple of confusion spread through the nearby investors. Several people stopped walking entirely. One older woman lowered her champagne invitation packet slowly. A younger man in a navy suit frowned deeply. "Hassan," he asked carefully, "what is she talking about?" No one answered immediately. Because no one could. The truth was too large now. Too visible. Too dangerous to contain. Beverly suddenly lunged toward me, her composure finally shattering completely. "You ungrateful little parasite," she screamed. "After everything this family has done for you." Her voice echoed violently through the parking structure. Conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned. The wealthy investors who had spent years admiring the Harrison family were now staring directly at a furious woman screaming at her future daughter-in-law beside a stained wedding dress and a pile of legal documents. The facade was cracking apart in real time. Monica stepped smoothly between us. "Careful," she warned coldly. "You're already looking at fraud charges. Assault would be a terrible addition." Harrison's face had gone ghost white. Sweat glistened along his forehead beneath the fluorescent lights. He realized something horrifying. This was no longer controllable. He couldn't intimidate me. He couldn't manipulate the guests. And he couldn't outrun the evidence. In the distance, faintly echoing from the entrance ramp of the parking structure, came the unmistakable sound of multiple vehicle doors slamming shut in quick succession. Monica glanced subtly toward the sound. Then she smiled. "The timing," she said softly, "is perfect." The room fell into a deathly silence after my words. Even the low hum of the ventilation system seemed to stop. 150 pairs of eyes shifted simultaneously between Harrison, the security guards, and the gigantic illuminated screen behind me. Harrison opened his mouth, but he no longer controlled the room. Jonathan Pierce slowly stood up in the third row. His expression had completely changed. He no longer looked like a confused guest at an awkward wedding. He looked exactly like what he was, a seasoned investor who had just heard the phrase corporate fraud attached to the name of a company holding millions of his dollars. "What the hell does this mean?" Jonathan demanded, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I clicked the presentation remote. The first slide filled the screen. A massive image of the forged power of attorney covered the entire wall of the ballroom. On the left was the fraudulent signature used to empty my joint account. On the right was an enlarged copy of my real signature from previous mortgage documents. The differences were brutal and obvious even to someone with no legal experience. Beneath the images was a line in bright red letters. Unauthorized transfer, $50, 000. A violent murmur exploded through the audience. That document, I said calmly, was used this morning to steal personal funds from my joint bank account. The money was immediately transferred into Harrison State Holdings. Beverly let out a sharp scream. She's lying. I clicked again. The next slide appeared instantly. Now the screen displayed banking records, wire transfer numbers, and the official Internal Revenue Service notice. Urgent federal tax levy payment. Amount: $49,500. Date: that same morning. Source of funds: my account. Final destination: IRS. The room erupted. Several investors shot to their feet. Others immediately pulled out their phones. I clearly heard phrases like, tax levy? What does final notice mean? Why weren't we told about this? Harrison tried to regain control. She stole confidential corporate documents, he roared. Incorrect, Monica replied as she slowly stood from the front row. Miss Kendra possessed legally authorized administrative access to the system during the company's server migration. All evidence obtained was accessed through valid, logged credentials. The color completely drained from Harrison's face. I pressed the remote again. The third slide appeared. This time the screen showed a gigantic financial flowchart. Red arrows connected deposits from new investors directly to immediate payouts sent to older investors. There were no projects, no construction, no real assets, only circular movement of money. At the top of the slide, in enormous bold letters, was one word: Ponzi scheme. A heavy silence dropped over the ballroom. Jonathan Pierce slowly walked forward without taking his eyes off the screen. Tell me this is fake, Harrison. Harrison swallowed hard. He didn't answer. That was worse than any confession. I took a slow breath and continued. For the past 14 months, I explained, Harrison State Holdings has failed to generate legitimate revenue sufficient to sustain its dividend payments. Returns distributed to early investors were funded directly by incoming capital from newer investors. I clicked again. Now names appeared. Transfers. Dates. Amounts. Jonathan's eyes locked onto one specific line. Jonathan Pierce, deposit, $2,000,000. Below it, distributed across 50 fraudulent dividend payments. Jonathan staggered backward like he'd been physically struck. No, he whispered. In the front row, Corny began crying for real for the first time. You can't do this, she whispered. I ignored her completely. In addition, I continued, the company's vice president of acquisitions directly participated in distributing fraudulent investor updates. I clicked again. The screen displayed dozens of corporate emails and progress reports signed digitally. Every single one carried the same name: Hassan Harrison. The entire room turned toward him. Hassan looked unable to breathe. He stammered. I didn't. You signed every false update, I said. You claimed construction permits existed when they did not. You confirmed progress on developments that never broke ground. You sold phantom properties. The man who had spent years pretending to be a polished heir now looked like a terrified child caught stealing. An older investor shot to his feet violently. My retirement fund is inside this garbage? Another shouted. Where's our money? Chaos exploded. People standing. Chairs scraping. Phones ringing. Voices overlapping across the ballroom. And then the final moment arrived. The double doors at the back of the pavilion burst open. 6 federal agents entered the ballroom in dark jackets with visible credentials. The noise died instantly. The lead agent walked directly toward the front. "Harrison State Holdings?" Nobody answered. The agent looked directly at Harrison. "I'm Agent Miller with the Federal Financial Crimes Division." He pulled out an official document. "We have federal seizure warrants and detention orders related to wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy." Beverly let out a broken choking sound. Harrison took a step backward. Hassan simply collapsed into his chair. The agents began moving forward, and I remained standing behind the podium, still wearing my coffee-stained wedding dress, watching their entire empire collapse exactly the way it appeared in their accounting books. Empty, inflated, and finally insolvent. "Exactly $50,000, I continued, pacing slowly across the stage while the enormous banking records glowed behind me were removed from my joint wedding account at 9:07 a.m. The money was then routed through Beverly Harrison's personal account for precisely 53 minutes before being transferred into Harrison State Holdings. I clicked the remote again. A bright red line appeared across the projection screen, visually mapping the movement of the funds from one account to another like a criminal blood trail. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Several investors had already stood up completely now, no longer pretending this was some bizarre family dispute. This was financial warfare. And where did the money go after entering Harrison State Holdings? I asked calmly. Another click. The next slide exploded onto the screen. An official IRS payment confirmation. Federal seal. Transaction ID. Timestamp. Final tax levy payment received. "Not Manhattan real estate," I said coldly. "Not construction permits. Not development materials. Not investor operations." I turned toward Harrison. "You used stolen wedding funds to stop the federal government from freezing your accounts." Jonathan Pierce stared at the screen like he'd forgotten how to blink. One of the hedge fund managers near the front row slowly removed his glasses. "You're telling me," he said carefully, "this company was hours away from a federal seizure?" "Yes," I answered. Harrison exploded. "She's twisting the numbers," he screamed, veins bulging violently in his neck. "Corporate cash flow management is complicated. Temporary liquidity problems are not fraud." I didn't even look at him. Temporary liquidity problems, I repeated evenly, do not require forged powers of attorney and emergency tax payments using stolen personal funds. A ripple of dark murmurs moved through the crowd. I advanced the slide again. Now the projector displayed internal corporate ledgers. Rows of numbers. Investor deposits. Outgoing dividend distributions. Red highlighted transfers. No operational revenue. No property income. No completed developments. Only investor money recycling endlessly through the system. "This," I said, pointing at the screen with the presentation remote, "is where the structure collapses." I zoomed into one section. Jonathan Pierce transfers $2 million into Harrison State Holdings on Monday. A red arrow appeared. Within 48 hours, that money is split across 50 dividend payments to earlier investors. More arrows appeared. Then new investor capital arrives and repeats the cycle again. The room became completely still. Every experienced investor in the ballroom understood exactly what they were looking at now. No one needed it explained anymore. One older woman near the back whispered the word out loud before I could. "Ponzi." I nodded once. "Yes." Hassan looked physically sick. He tried again to pull away from the security guard restraining him. "Kendra, stop," he begged weakly. "Please. You're destroying everything." I looked directly at him for the first time in several minutes. "No, Hassan," I said quietly. "I'm documenting everything." The distinction hit him like a punch. I clicked the remote once more. A series of emails filled the giant screen. fraudulent construction updates, fake progress reports, false investor communications. Every single one digitally signed by the same executive account. Hassan Harrison, Vice President of Acquisitions. A collective wave of outrage tore through the audience. Jonathan Pierce turned sharply toward Hassan. "You sent these reports personally?" Hassan's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "He handled investor communications," Harrison snapped desperately. "He trusted internal accounting data." "He didn't know." "That's a lie," I interrupted instantly. I enlarged one specific email. A highlighted paragraph appeared. "Construction crews began structural steel installation this week." I looked directly at the audience. There was no construction crew. Click. A satellite image of the Manhattan property appeared. An empty dirt lot. Timestamped 3 days earlier. The ballroom erupted. People were shouting openly now. "What the hell is this? You stole our money. Call my attorney immediately. Lock the exits." Courtney began sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Beverly looked like she was about to faint. And Harrison. Harrison finally looked small. Not powerful. Not wealthy. Not untouchable. Just a frightened old man watching decades of manufactured prestige collapse in real time under fluorescent lighting and forensic accounting. Then the doors at the back of the ballroom opened again. The federal agents stepped fully into the room. This time nobody mistook them for hotel security. Agent Miller walked straight down the center aisle while the ballroom split apart around him. "You need to step away from the stage immediately," he ordered Harrison. Harrison staggered backward. "You don't understand," he stammered. "This is being misrepresented." "We understand perfectly," Agent Miller replied. He raised a thick folder. "Your financial records were already verified before we entered the building." The agent turned slightly toward the crowd. "If you are currently an investor with Harrison State Holdings, federal representatives will remain on site tonight to collect statements and contact information." Panic exploded across the ballroom. Phones appeared everywhere. People began yelling over each other. Several investors immediately started demanding account access and wire confirmations. And through all of it, I remained standing alone behind the podium in my stained wedding dress, illuminated by the cold white glow of the projector screen while the empire that tried to consume me collapsed line by line behind my shoulders. "Tell them to check the accounts," Beverly sobbed, shaking him desperately. "Tell them this is all fake." But Harrison didn't answer. Because at that exact moment, 3 different investors in the front rows began speaking over each other. "My escrow account is frozen. The portal's offline. There's no Manhattan permit filing." The panic spread through the ballroom like fire through gasoline. Jonathan Pierce slowly lowered his phone from his ear. Every trace of color had drained from his face. When he looked at Harrison again, it was no longer with admiration or partnership. It was with the cold fury of a predator realizing another predator had stolen from him. "You stole from us," Jonathan said quietly. The silence that followed was somehow louder than all the screaming before it. Harrison took a step backward, then another. His eyes darted again toward the exits. And that was when the ballroom doors exploded open. 6 federal agents in dark jackets moved into the pavilion with terrifying precision. The gold letters across their backs reflected under the chandelier lights. FBI. Behind them came 2 IRS criminal investigators carrying sealed evidence cases. Every sound in the room died instantly. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling a folder from beneath his arm. "Harrison Cole Harrison," he announced clearly. "You are under federal investigation for wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy." Beverly screamed. Courtney burst into hysterical sobs. Hassan looked like his soul had left his body. The lead agent continued. "You have the right to remain silent." Harrison ran. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't clever. It was pathetic. The mighty real estate titan bolted sideways between the conference chairs, shoving past horrified investors while security contractors intercepted him almost instantly. One of the federal agents grabbed his arm before he even reached the side exit. "Get your hands off me," Harrison roared, thrashing violently. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Jonathan Pierce said from the third row, his voice ice cold. "It isn't." The investors watched without sympathy as Harrison was forced to the ground and handcuffed directly beneath the giant projector screen, displaying his fraudulent financial records. Beverly collapsed into her chair, shaking uncontrollably. "Harrison," she cried, "do something." But there was nothing left to do. The empire was gone. Every illusion had died under fluorescent light and forensic accounting. One of the IRS investigators approached the stage and looked up at me. "Miss Kendra Lawson?" I nodded once. He handed me a business card. "Your documentation likely prevented millions more in losses," he said professionally. "We'll need your formal statement and full copies of the forensic files." "Already encrypted and duplicated," I replied calmly. "You'll have everything within the hour." The investigator gave a small, impressed nod. Behind him, federal agents were separating Beverly, Courtney, and Hassan from the crowd while terrified investors shouted demands for attorneys and asset freezes. Hassan looked up at me one final time as an agent held his arm. His expression wasn't anger anymore. It was disbelief. As if he still couldn't understand how the quiet orphan he thought he controlled had destroyed his entire dynasty in less than an hour. "Kendra," he whispered weakly. I stared at him without emotion. "You should have left my bank account alone." There were no more polished smiles. No more carefully rehearsed country club manners. No more illusion of generational elegance. Only panic. Only greed stripped completely naked under federal lighting and the scrutiny of the very elite they had spent decades manipulating. The ballroom smelled faintly of expensive perfume, spilled champagne, and fear. Agent Miller tightened the cuffs on Harrison's wrists while another federal investigator escorted Beverly toward the aisle, despite her hysterical screaming. Her designer heels scraped violently across the polished floor as she fought against reality itself. "You can't do this to us," Beverly shrieked. "We are respected people." "No," Agent Miller replied flatly. "You were funded people." That single sentence silenced half the room. Hassan stood frozen beside two agents, blood-red handprint still burning across his cheek where his mother had struck him. His expensive tuxedo suddenly looked ridiculous on him now, like a costume borrowed by a frightened child pretending to be powerful. His eyes found mine again. This time there was no manipulation left in them. No charm. No arrogance. Only terror. "Kendra," he whispered hoarsely. "Please. You know I never wanted this to happen." I looked at him calmly from behind the podium. "You wanted the lifestyle," I answered. "You just didn't want the consequences." That hit harder than Beverly's slap. His face collapsed inward as though something inside him had finally broken permanently. Nearby, Courtney remained on the floor sobbing uncontrollably while federal agents cataloged her confiscated electronics, banking devices, and corporate records into evidence bags. "My company was real," she cried weakly through tears. "I worked hard." "No," Jonathan Pierce interrupted coldly from the front row. The billionaire venture capitalist stared down at her with open disgust. "You played CEO using stolen retirement money." Courtney covered her face and screamed. The investors no longer looked shocked. Now they looked calculating. Predatory. The moment fear passes for people like them, they begin hunting for recovery. Phones rang nonstop across the ballroom as attorneys, compliance officers, and forensic accountants were mobilized in real time. Emergency injunctions were already being drafted before the Harrison family had even left the building. The empire was not merely collapsing anymore. It was being dissected alive. Agent Miller eventually turned toward me again. "We'll need you downtown for a formal statement tonight," he said. "I assumed as much," I replied. He glanced briefly at the massive fraud presentation still glowing behind me on the projector screen. "You built this entire case in less than a day?" "6 hours," Monica answered before I could. Several investors nearby exchanged stunned looks. One older hedge fund manager actually let out a low whistle. For the first time all evening, the room stopped looking at me like a ruined bride. Now they were looking at me like something far more dangerous. A forensic predator. Someone who walked into a ballroom wearing a destroyed wedding dress and dismantled a multi-million-dollar criminal empire before dessert service. As federal agents finally escorted the Harrison family toward the exits, Beverly twisted violently one last time to look back at me. Her mascara-streaked face contorted with hatred. "You ruined our lives," she screamed. I met her gaze without blinking. "No," I said quietly. "You ruined your own lives the moment you decided stealing from me was safer than telling the truth." I slowly slid the 3-carat diamond engagement ring from my finger. The massive stone caught the harsh white light of the chandelier one final time, sparkling like a stolen trophy. Hassan watched my hand with desperate, bloodshot eyes, hope flickering across his ruined face as if he believed this was a gesture of forgiveness. It wasn't. I crouched down until we were eye level. "You never loved me, Jason," I said quietly, my voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "You loved access to me, my income, my stability, my professionalism. You looked at me and saw an emergency fund with a heartbeat." His face crumpled. I held the ring delicately between 2 fingers. "This ring was never a promise," I continued. "It was collateral." Then I dropped it. The diamond ring struck the polished wooden step with a sharp metallic crack before bouncing once across the floor and disappearing beneath a row of conference chairs. Hassan stared after it in horror, like he had just watched the last piece of his old life vanish forever. "You asked me to save you," I said. "But I already did save myself." I straightened back to my full height. The federal agent stepped forward immediately, gripping Hassan firmly by the arm and hauling him back to his feet. This time, Hassan didn't resist. The fight had completely drained out of him. His expensive tuxedo hung crookedly from his body. His wrists locked in steel cuffs as tears streamed helplessly down his face. "Kendra," he shouted one final time as the agents dragged him backward toward the exit. "Please, don't do this to me." I didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. Nearby, Beverly was still screaming at the agents, processing her evidence inventory. Harrison looked 20 years older in the span of 10 minutes. His shoulders collapsed inward as detectives escorted him toward the service elevators. Courtney sat trembling on the carpet, surrounded by confiscated luxury items, sobbing over frozen bank accounts and seized assets. The dynasty they worshipped had dissolved into exactly what it always was beneath the designer suits and country club smiles. A criminal enterprise funded by theft. The ballroom remained frozen in stunned silence as the Harrison family disappeared one by one through the heavy mahogany doors under federal escort. The doors shut behind them with a deep final boom. And just like that, it was over. No wedding. No marriage. No Harrison dynasty. Only evidence, arrests, and the cold reality of consequences. I stood alone at the center of the stage in my mud-stained wedding dress, surrounded by shattered investors, abandoned champagne glasses, and the wreckage of a family that had mistaken arrogance for invincibility. Monica slowly walked up beside me. "Well," she said dryly, glancing around the devastated ballroom. "That was significantly more efficient than civil litigation." A few stunned investors let out nervous laughter, the psychological pressure in the room finally beginning to crack. Jonathan Pierce rose slowly from his seat in the third row. His expression remained hard and furious, but when he looked at me now, there was something entirely different in his eyes. Respect. "You built this case in less than 48 hours?" he asked carefully. I nodded once. I had motivation. Jonathan exhaled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've spent 30 years in venture capital," he admitted. "And I've never seen a forensic presentation dismantle a fraud operation that completely." Around the room, more investors began approaching cautiously, speaking in low voices with attorneys and federal agents. The panic was evolving into strategy now. Damage control, asset recovery, survival. The predators were reorganizing. Monica leaned closer beside me. "You know," she murmured, "after today, every major firm on the East Coast is going to know your name." I looked down at the stains across the hem of my ruined wedding dress. A few hours ago, those stains had felt humiliating. Now they looked like evidence. I picked up the encrypted flash drive from the podium and slipped it calmly into my palm. "For the record," I said softly, staring toward the closed ballroom doors where the Harrisons had vanished, "this was never revenge." I paused. It was an audit. "Hassan," another reporter shouted over the chaos, "did you knowingly participate in falsifying corporate escrow records?" "Mrs. Harrison, are federal prosecutors pursuing racketeering charges?" "Courtney, how much investor money funded your company?" The once untouchable Harrison family recoiled under the violent explosion of public exposure. Harrison lowered his head instinctively, trying to shield his face from the cameras as agents forced him forward through the aisle. Beverly completely unraveled. She screamed at reporters, thrashed against the federal agents, and demanded lawyers while camera flashes immortalized every second of her collapse. Courtney sobbed uncontrollably, trying to hide behind her cuffed wrists as microphones pursued her like predators smelling blood. And Hassan looked only at me. Even while agents dragged him backward toward the exit, even while reporters screamed accusations into his face, his eyes remained locked on mine with the hollow devastation of a man realizing too late that he had destroyed the only stable thing in his life. "Kendra," he shouted desperately over the storm of voices. "Please." The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind them before he could finish. The reporters immediately pivoted. And then every camera in the ballroom turned toward me. The sudden attention hit like floodlights. 1 second earlier, I had been the betrayed bride. Now I was the woman who had publicly dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud empire during her own wedding reception. Microphones rose instantly. "Kendra, when did you first discover the fraud? Did you coordinate directly with federal investigators? How large do you believe the total financial losses are? Are more arrests expected? Do you plan to file civil suits against the Harrison estate?" The entire ballroom buzzed with electricity. I stood motionless at the edge of the stage in my ruined wedding dress, while dozens of cameras focused on me beneath the blazing chandelier light. Mud stains marked the silk at my feet. My hair was slightly disheveled from hours of confrontation. The projector behind me still displayed frozen bank transfers and shell corporations across a 30-foot screen. It looked less like a wedding reception now and more like the collapse of a government regime. Monica stepped subtly beside me, ready to intercept the media frenzy if necessary. But I calmly reached for the microphone on the podium myself. The ballroom quieted almost immediately. Even the reporters stopped shouting. I looked across the sea of cameras, flashing lights, investors, federal agents, and shattered champagne glasses scattered across the tables. Then I spoke. "I'm not interested in becoming famous for this," I said evenly. "What happened here tonight wasn't entertainment. It wasn't revenge. And it certainly wasn't a publicity stunt." The room remained completely silent except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. I was supposed to marry into a family that presented themselves as pillars of wealth, stability, and prestige, I continued. Instead, I discovered an organization built on fraud, coercion, theft, and financial manipulation. A reporter cautiously raised a hand. Kendra, are you saying you uncovered this entirely on your own? I followed the evidence, I replied simply. That's what forensic auditors do. Jonathan Pierce remained standing near the third row, arms crossed tightly as he watched me with grim respect. Around him, investors continued quietly speaking with attorneys and federal investigators. The ballroom had transformed completely. Hours earlier, it had been intended as a celebration of social status and manufactured perfection. Now it was a live crime scene. One of the reporters glanced toward the champagne flute still sitting abandoned on the cocktail table beside the stage. The engagement ring remained visible beneath the golden liquid at the bottom of the glass. The camera operators noticed it too. Several lenses immediately zoomed in. A young reporter blinked in surprise before asking carefully, "Was that your engagement ring?" I glanced briefly toward the glass. "Yes," I answered calmly. "Why throw it away?" I looked directly into the nearest camera. Because evidence should stay with the crime scene. I stood quietly at the center of the ruined ballroom, letting the reality settle over me like the final silence after a violent storm. The massive projector screen still glowed behind the stage, frozen on spreadsheets, shell corporations, and wire transfer records that had just dismantled an entire dynasty in under an hour. Half-empty champagne glasses sat abandoned across conference tables. Expensive chairs were pushed out of place from panicked investors scrambling to contact attorneys and banks. The Pavilion Diamond no longer looked like a luxury venue. It looked like the aftermath of a financial assassination. Near the exits, federal agents continued escorting evidence boxes through the ballroom while detectives interviewed investors one by one. The low murmur of legal terminology, asset freezes, subpoenas, and federal warrants drifted through the room like smoke. And somewhere downstairs in the hotel lobby, the Harrison family was being marched through a wall of cameras for the evening news. Monica glanced up from her phone again, clearly entertained. "Oh, this is getting worse for them by the minute," she said with visible satisfaction. One of the stations already labeled Beverly the Bridezilla Bernie Madoff. A few exhausted investors nearby actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the psychological pressure had finally broken enough for people to breathe again. I looked down at my wedding dress. The silk was stained with mud and coffee. The lace hem was ruined. One heel was scratched from the parking garage concrete. Hours ago, I would have considered it a disaster. Now it felt strangely symbolic. The perfect image had been destroyed, and the truth survived it. Jonathan Pierce approached the stage again, this time without the cold hostility he carried earlier. His expression remained serious, but there was no longer suspicion in it. Only respect. "You know," he said carefully, "most people in your position would have disappeared after discovering something like this." I folded my arms lightly. Most people aren't forensic auditors. That earned the faintest smile from him. One of the financial detectives nearby closed a thick evidence binder and looked toward me. "Miss Kendra," he said professionally, "your documentation likely accelerated this investigation by several months." Monica snorted softly beside me. "She did half your job for you." The detective didn't even argue. Because it was true. I turned slightly, looking across the ballroom one last time. Hours earlier, this room had been designed to celebrate appearances. Wealth, status, legacy, power. But appearances are fragile things. One audit, one ledger, one verified transaction trail. That was all it took to bring the entire illusion crashing down. I picked up the abandoned champagne flute from the cocktail table near the stage. At the bottom of the glass, beneath the fading gold bubbles, the 3-carat engagement ring still rested silently. For a moment, I simply stared at it. Then I walked calmly to the nearest federal evidence table and set the glass down beside the confiscated financial records. The detective raised an eyebrow. "Evidence?" he asked dryly. I gave a small nod. "Accessory to fraud," I replied. Even Monica laughed at that one. And for the first time all day, I did too. For the first time in her life, Courtney had to survive without stolen money cushioning every mistake she made. The transformation was brutal. The same woman who once mocked waiters, sneered at accountants, and poured iced coffee onto a custom wedding gown for sport was suddenly working temporary reception jobs under a different last name because no major firm would touch anyone connected to the Harrison scandal. Every background check dragged the fraud case back into the light. Every interview ended the same way. Politely. Coldly. Permanently. The social circles that once worshipped her vanished overnight. Her wealthy friends stopped answering calls the moment subpoenas started circulating. The luxury influencers she networked with quietly unfollowed her accounts. Invitations disappeared. Investors disappeared. Even the country club members who once praised Beverly's perfect family pretended they had never known the Harrisons at all. Status built on fraud collapses faster than paper and water. I watched none of this directly. I never stalked their downfall online. I never searched their names. I never attended interviews or read gossip columns dissecting their disgrace. Because by then, they had already become irrelevant to my life. That was the part people never understood when they contacted me after the scandal exploded. Reporters, podcasters, documentary producers, even publishers reached out constantly wanting the dramatic emotional story of the bride who destroyed a financial empire. But they all misunderstood something fundamental. I didn't destroy the Harrisons. The Harrisons destroyed themselves. I simply documented it. My life moved forward quietly after the sentencing. The federal government recovered a significant percentage of the stolen investor capital through asset liquidation, and several investors personally thanked me for preventing even greater losses. Jonathan Pierce later offered me a senior forensic oversight position at one of his private firms overseeing internal fraud investigations across multiple investment portfolios. I declined politely, not because I lacked ambition. Because for the first time in years, I no longer wanted my entire existence consumed by cleaning up other people's corruption. Instead, I disappeared for a while. I rented a small apartment overlooking the water several states away where nobody recognized my face from the news coverage. I stopped wearing corporate black every day. I slept without checking my phone for emergency emails at 2 a.m. I learned what silence sounded like when it wasn't filled with manipulation, performance, or damage control. Monica visited occasionally, usually unannounced, usually carrying expensive wine and brutal commentary about white-collar criminals she was litigating against. One evening nearly a year after the wedding that never happened, we sat together on the balcony watching the sun disappear beneath the waterline. "You know what still bothers me?" Monica asked casually, swirling wine in her glass. I glanced sideways at her. "What?" She smirked. They really thought they were smarter than a forensic auditor. I laughed quietly into my drink. Not the sharp, humorless laugh I had developed during the investigation. A real one. Monica leaned back in her chair. "The ring line was still your best work, by the way." I rolled my eyes. "You've mentioned that 6 times. Because it deserved recognition." The breeze carried salt air across the balcony. Below us, the city lights reflected softly across the dark water. Peace felt strange at first, but eventually it stopped feeling unfamiliar. And somewhere far away behind prison walls, frozen assets, and federal case files, the Harrison dynasty faded into exactly what it deserved to become. A cautionary tale buried in public records. While I, the woman they underestimated, manipulated, robbed, and tried to humiliate, simply kept living. The last thing I heard through mutual acquaintances was that the former golden child of the Harrison dynasty was now working double shifts as a waitress at a greasy 24-hour diner off the interstate, wearing a stained polyester uniform and serving cheap coffee to truck drivers just to cover her tiny rent payment. The woman who once poured iced coffee on my wedding dress was now wiping sticky tables for spare change. I never attended a wedding that day in the Hudson Valley, but I walked away with something infinitely more valuable. The public exposure of the Harrisons' fraud launched my professional reputation into the stratosphere. The elite investors who sat in that hotel ballroom witnessed my forensic auditing abilities firsthand. Within a week of the raid, my phone was flooded with lucrative job offers and private consulting requests from some of the most powerful financial institutions in the country. I didn't accept any of their offers. Instead, I took the recovered $50,000 that the bank quickly returned to me, leveraged my new network of high-net-worth contacts, and launched my own independent forensic auditing firm. Monica officially joined as my chief legal advisor, and together we built an unstoppable agency. Right now, I'm sitting behind a sleek glass desk in my private corner office in Manhattan. Morning sunlight pours through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the framed professional certifications hanging on my wall. I take a slow, satisfying sip of premium black coffee, letting the rich, dark flavor settle on my tongue. I turn my leather executive chair toward the massive windows and look out over the breathtaking New York City skyline. The city hums with ambition, wealth, and opportunity, and I carved out my rightful place at the top of it. I lost a worthless wedding with a family of toxic, manipulative criminals, but in exchange I gained something far greater: absolute freedom, peace of mind, and a career at the very peak of my industry. They thought locking the doors to my wedding venue would trap me inside their web of humiliation and financial ruin. What they never realized was that those same doors became the key that opened the entrance to their prison. Reflecting on Kendra's journey, the deepest lesson is the absolute necessity of maintaining independence, both financial and emotional, when dealing with toxic relationships. The Harrison family weaponized wealth and social status to manipulate, intimidate, and exploit others. They assumed a bride, especially one without a powerful family background, would collapse under the humiliation of a canceled wedding and surrender her future out of fear and desperation. But Kendra's real protection wasn't only her forensic accounting expertise. It was her unwavering self-respect and autonomy. She refused to let their manufactured reality override the facts she knew were true. That's the crucial lesson about manipulative people. They rely on shock, confusion, and emotional isolation to force compliance. They expect you to crumble beneath public shame or the fear of losing their approval. Kendra proved that when life slams shut the doors you expected to walk through, you don't sit there defeated. You stay calm, trust your instincts, examine the evidence, and reclaim control. By unraveling the financial deception instead of surrendering to panic, she transformed a moment of vulnerability into complete victory. In the end, the story reminds us that our value is not determined by the families we marry into or the status other people assign to us. True worth is built on integrity, capability, independence, and self-respect. Walking away from abuse is powerful. Walking away with undeniable truth is even more powerful. If you ever find yourself manipulated or cornered by toxic people, trust your instincts, gather the facts, and fiercely protect your independence. Amen.